My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm 32 years old. Until 3 months ago, I thought I knew everything about my family. I was wrong, dead wrong. It was a typical Tuesday morning in downtown Seattle when my world turned upside down. The rain was doing its usual Pacific Northwest dance against the windows of Mitchell & Associates, the marketing firm my grandfather built from nothing back in 1967. I was reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant knocked on my office door. "Sarah, there's a gentleman here to see you. Says he's from your grandfather's law firm." My heart skipped. Grandpa Henry had passed away just 2 weeks earlier, and we'd already handled the will reading. What could they possibly want now? The man who entered my office was tall and thin, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He introduced himself as David Reynolds, my grandfather's personal attorney for over 20 years. "Miss Mitchell, your grandfather left specific instructions that this envelope should only be given to you 2 weeks after his funeral." He placed a cream-colored envelope on my desk. He was very particular about the timing. My hands trembled as I broke the wax seal. Yes, an actual wax seal. That was so like Grandpa Henry, always dramatic. Inside was a single sheet of paper in his distinctive handwriting. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're now facing the biggest challenge of your life. I've watched Marcus circle this company like a vulture for years. He believes he deserves what I built, but he doesn't understand the blood, sweat, and sleepless nights that went into every brick of this foundation. Be careful, my dear. He'll come for the company, and he won't play fair. Trust no one completely, but remember, sometimes the people who seem like enemies might be the only ones telling you the truth. There's more you need to know. Check the safety deposit box at First National, box 247. The key is taped under my desk drawer. Whatever happens, don't let him win. Your loving grandfather, Henry Mitchell." I read the letter 3 times before the words really sank in. Marcus, my cousin Marcus, the same Marcus who'd given such a beautiful eulogy at Grandpa's funeral, talking about family legacy and staying united. The same Marcus who'd hugged me afterward and promised we'd work together to honor Grandpa's memory. Mr. Reynolds cleared his throat. "Your grandfather also asked me to give you this advice. Document everything. He said you'd understand what that meant." After he left, I sat in my office staring at the Seattle skyline, trying to process what I'd just learned. The Space Needle looked smaller from here, almost fragile against the gray clouds. I'd always thought Marcus and I had a decent relationship. Sure, he'd been bitter when Grandpa chose me to run the company instead of him, but I assumed he'd gotten over it. After all, he was only 28 and had barely 2 years of business experience. I had an MBA from Northwestern and had been working alongside Grandpa for 8 years. But apparently, I'd been naive. I found the key exactly where Grandpa said it would be. That afternoon, I drove to First National Bank through the winding streets of Capitol Hill, past the coffee shops and vintage stores that made Seattle feel like home. The safety deposit box contained documents that made my blood run cold. There were copies of emails between Marcus and several board members discussing ways to restructure leadership and bring fresh perspective to the company. There were financial records showing that Marcus had been slowly buying shares from minor shareholders, using money I couldn't account for. Most disturbing of all, there was a detailed business plan titled Mitchell & Associates, A New Vision, with Marcus's name as CEO. The plan outlined changes that would fundamentally transform everything Grandpa had built. Our focus on small businesses and personal relationships would be scrapped in favor of chasing Fortune 500 clients. The family atmosphere that made our employees loyal would be replaced with efficiency optimization and workforce streamlining. As I drove back to the office through the evening traffic on I-5, my phone rang. It was Marcus. "Hey, Sarah, how are you holding up? I know losing Grandpa has been hard on all of us." His voice sounded so genuine, so concerned. If I hadn't just spent the afternoon reading about his betrayal, I would have been touched by his care. "I'm managing," I said carefully. "Just trying to keep the company running the way Grandpa would have wanted. That's actually why I'm calling. I've been thinking we should sit down and talk about the future. Maybe grab dinner this week? I have some ideas that might help us both." Every instinct screamed at me to confront him right then, to demand explanations for what I'd found. But Grandpa's words echoed in my mind. "Document everything." "Sure, Marcus. How about Friday night?" "Perfect. I'll make reservations at the Metropolitan Grill. 7 o'clock? After I hung up, I realized my hands were shaking. The rain had started again. turning the Seattle streets into rivers of reflected neon light. I'd agreed to have dinner with someone who was actively plotting to steal my company, my legacy, my life's work, but I had 4 days to prepare. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting with Tom Bradley, our head of operations, and Lisa Chen, our financial director. These were the two people Grandpa had always trusted most, and I hoped I could trust them too. We met in the small conference room on the 3rd floor, the one with the view of Elliott Bay. I could see the ferries moving slowly across the gray water, carrying their cargo of commuters and tourists between Seattle and the islands. "I need to share something with both of you," I began, "and I need to know I can count on your complete discretion." Tom, who'd been with the company for 15 years, leaned forward. His weathered face showed concern. "Of course, Sarah. What's going on?" I told them about Grandpa's letter and what I'd found in the safety deposit box. I watched their faces change from confusion to shock to anger. Lisa was the first to speak. "That explains the questions Marcus has been asking me about our client list and financial projections. I thought he was just trying to be helpful after your grandfather's death." "What kind of questions?" I asked. "Specific things. Which clients generate the most revenue, what our profit margins look like, how much we spend on employee benefits." At the time, I thought he was just trying to understand the business better. Tom shook his head. He approached me too, asked about our operational procedures, our vendor contracts, our office lease terms, said he wanted to make sure everything was running smoothly for you during this difficult time. The picture was becoming clearer. Marcus hadn't been offering support, he'd been conducting reconnaissance. "There's something else," Lisa continued. "I've been reviewing our shareholder records, and there have been several small share transfers over the past 6 months. Nothing that required board approval individually, but together they add up to about 8% of the company." My stomach dropped. "All to the same buyer?" "A company called Cascade Holdings. I tried to research them, but it's just a shell corporation registered in Delaware." We spent the next 2 hours going through every detail we could find. The pattern was clear. Marcus had been planning this takeover for months, maybe longer. He'd been patient, methodical, and clever. If Grandpa hadn't left that warning, I might never have seen it coming until it was too late. By Thursday evening, we had a plan of our own. I would meet Marcus for dinner as scheduled, try to get him to reveal more of his intentions, and record everything. Tom and Lisa would work with our attorney to understand our legal options and shore up any vulnerabilities in our corporate structure. As I walked home to my apartment in Belltown that night, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement, I thought about everything Grandpa had taught me. He'd always said that business was about people, not just profit. He'd built Mitchell & Associates by treating clients like family and employees like partners. Under his leadership, we'd never had a layoff, and our client retention rate was over 90%. Marcus wanted to change all of that. To him, the company was just an asset to be optimized, a resource to be exploited for maximum return. He didn't understand that what made us successful wasn't our processes or our client list. It was our culture, our values, our commitment to doing right by people. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the dinner tomorrow, about what Marcus might say, about what he might do if he realized I knew about his plans. The rain continued its steady rhythm against my bedroom window, like a countdown to whatever was coming next. Friday evening arrived with one of those rare Seattle sunsets that makes you remember why people fall in love with this city. The rain had stopped, and golden light was streaming through the breaks in the clouds as I walked into the Metropolitan Grill. Despite everything, I had to admire Marcus's choice. This place had been one of Grandpa's favorites. I arrived 10 minutes early and asked for a table in the back corner where we'd have privacy. The hostess, a young woman with a bright smile, led me past the elegant wood paneling and white tablecloths to a quiet spot overlooking the city. I ordered a glass of wine to calm my nerves and activated the recording app on my phone, placing it carefully on the table next to my purse. Marcus arrived exactly on time, looking every inch the successful businessman in his tailored navy suit. At 28, he had the kind of confidence that came from never having to struggle for anything. His sandy hair was perfectly styled, and his smile was warm and genuine, or at least it appeared to be. "Sarah!" He leaned in to hug me, and I caught a whiff of expensive cologne. "You look great. How are you really doing?" "I know these past few weeks have been incredibly difficult. Some days are better than others," I replied honestly. "The company keeps me busy, which helps." We ordered dinner, He chose the dry-aged ribeye, I went with the wild salmon, and made small talk about the weather, the city, mutual friends. To anyone watching, we would have looked like a normal family dinner, but I could feel the tension underneath, like an electrical current waiting to spark. It wasn't until after our entrees arrived that Marcus shifted the conversation to business. You know, Sarah, I've been thinking a lot about Uncle Henry's legacy and what he would have wanted for the company. I took a careful sip of wine. Oh? What conclusions have you reached? Well, he built something amazing, but I think we both have to admit that the business world has changed dramatically since 1967. The strategies that worked for him might not be enough to keep us competitive going forward. What kind of changes are you thinking about? Marcus leaned forward, his eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. We need to think bigger, Sarah, much bigger. Right now, we're basically a boutique firm serving small and medium businesses. That's fine, but the real money is in enterprise clients, Fortune 500 companies with massive marketing budgets. I nodded thoughtfully. That would certainly change our focus. Exactly. And to compete at that level, we'd need to streamline our operations. Right now, we have 43 employees for a company our size. Most of our competitors run much leaner. We could probably cut that by 30% and actually improve our efficiency. The salmon suddenly tasted like cardboard in my mouth. He was talking about laying off a third of our workforce, people who had families, mortgages, children in college, people who had been loyal to our family for years. That's quite a significant change, I managed to say. Change is never easy, but it's necessary for growth. And Sarah, I want you to know that I'm here to help with all of this. I know Uncle Henry left you in charge, and I respect that, but you don't have to carry this burden alone. Here it comes, I thought. I've been developing some proposals that I think could really transform the company. New client acquisition strategies, operational improvements, market expansion plans. I'd love to present them to the board next month. What kind of timeline are you thinking about for implementation? Marcus's smile widened. Well, that depends on how quickly we can get everyone aligned. I know change can be uncomfortable, especially for some of the longer-term employees, but with the right leadership structure, I think we could start seeing results within 6 months. Leadership structure? Obviously, you'd remain involved in the transition, but given your background is more in client relations and creative strategy, it might make sense to bring in someone with more operational experience to handle the business transformation side. There it was. He wanted me to step aside voluntarily, to hand over control while thinking it was my idea. The audacity was breathtaking. And you think you have the right operational experience for that kind of role? I've been studying business transformation strategies extensively over the past year. I have connections with some of the top consulting firms in the country. Plus, being family, you know my heart is in the right place. I want what's best for the company just as much as you do. I stared at him across the table, watching his earnest expression, listening to his smooth words. If I hadn't seen the documents in Grandpa's safety deposit box, I might have been convinced. He sounded so reasonable, so concerned, so genuinely interested in the company's success. But I knew better now. I knew about Cascade Holdings. I knew about the shares he'd been secretly acquiring. I knew about the emails with board members. This wasn't about transformation or growth or honoring Grandpa's legacy. This was about Marcus finally getting what he thought he deserved. It sounds like you've put a lot of thought into this, I said carefully. I have. And Sarah, I want you to know that whatever happens, you'll always have a place in the company. This isn't about pushing you out. It's about positioning us both for success. The waiter came to clear our plates and offer dessert. I declined, but Marcus ordered the chocolate lava cake. Even in the middle of planning a corporate coup, he maintained his appetite. Can I ask you something, Marcus? I said, after the waiter left. Of course. Why now? Why are you bringing this up so soon after Grandpa's death? For the first time that evening, Marcus looked uncomfortable. He shifted in his chair and took a long sip of his wine before answering. Honestly? Because I'm worried about the vultures. There are bigger firms out there that would love to acquire a company like ours, especially now that Uncle Henry isn't around to fight them off. If we don't strengthen our position quickly, we could become a target. It was a clever answer, playing on legitimate fears about corporate acquisition while positioning himself as the protector. But I wasn't buying it. Have you heard from any potential acquirers? Not directly, but there's been some market chatter. My contacts at Goldman Sachs mentioned that some of the major advertising conglomerates are looking for West Coast acquisitions. Goldman Sachs. Of course he had contacts at Goldman Sachs. Marcus had always been good at networking, at making connections with people who could advance his interests. It was one of his few genuine talents. "Well, I appreciate you looking out for the company's interests," I said. "Should we schedule a formal meeting to discuss your proposals? I was hoping we could keep this between family for now, just until we work out the details." "Family," I repeated. "Right." Marcus reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. His skin was soft. He'd never done a day of manual labor in his life. "Sarah, I know this is a lot to think about, and I know you're still grieving. Take whatever time you need to process everything. But please know that I'm on your side. We're family, and family sticks together." I looked into his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity. He was either a brilliant actor or he genuinely believed his own story. Maybe he'd convinced himself that he really was trying to help, that his motives were pure. People were remarkably good at rationalizing their actions when those actions served their interests. "I'll definitely give it serious consideration," I promised. We finished dinner with more small talk about family memories and shared stories about Grandpa. Marcus paid the check with a platinum credit card and walked me to my car in the restaurant's parking garage. "This was really good, Sarah. We should do this more often. Family is all we have left now." He hugged me goodbye and I felt like a fraud. But as I drove home through the quiet Seattle streets, I reminded myself that he was the real fraud. I was just trying to protect what Grandpa had built. Back in my apartment, I immediately called Tom and Lisa on a conference line to debrief. "He's definitely planning to make his move soon," I told them after describing the dinner conversation. "He talked about presenting proposals to the board next month." "Did he mention anything about the shares he's been acquiring?" Lisa asked. "Not directly, but he talked about getting everyone aligned, which I think means getting board support for his plans." Tom's voice was grim. "Sarah, we need to act fast. If he's got enough board members on his side and he controls 8% of the shares, he could call for a leadership vote." "What are our options?" "Legally, as long as you maintain majority shareholder support, you're protected. But if he can convince enough shareholders that his plan is better for the company's value," Lisa finished the thought, "they might vote against you, even if they like you personally." I stared out my apartment window at the city lights, thinking about everything that was at stake. 43 employees who trusted me to protect their jobs. Dozens of clients who relied on our personal approach to their marketing needs. A legacy that Grandpa had spent 50+ years building. "Then we need to make sure our shareholders understand what's really at stake," I said. "And we need to do it before Marcus makes his formal presentation." "What did you have in mind?" Tom asked. "We call our own board meeting, present our vision for the company's future. Show them that we can grow and evolve without abandoning everything that makes us who we are." "That's risky," Lisa warned. "If we tip our hand too early, Marcus might accelerate his timeline." "It's riskier to wait," I replied. "At least this way, we control the narrative." We agreed to meet first thing Monday morning to start preparing our presentation. As I got ready for bed that night, I thought about the recording of my dinner conversation with Marcus. It wouldn't be admissible in court, but it clearly showed his intentions and methods. If things got ugly, it might be useful to have. I also thought about something else Marcus had said. Family sticks together. The irony was almost painful. He was using the language of family loyalty while actively betraying that very loyalty. But maybe that was just how some people operated. They convinced themselves that their selfish actions were actually noble sacrifices. One way or another, I was about to find out exactly what Marcus was capable of. Monday morning came, with the kind of gray Seattle drizzle that seems to seep into your bones. I arrived at the office early, around 6:30, and found Tom already there with coffee and a stack of financial reports. The building was quiet, except for the hum of the heating system and the distant sound of traffic on the street below. "I've been here since 5, Tom said, handing me a steaming mug. "I wanted to review all our client contracts before Lisa arrives. We need to understand exactly what we'd be risking if Marcus follows through on his plans." We spread the documents across the conference table and began working through the numbers. What we found was both encouraging and terrifying. Encouraging because our client retention rate and profit margins were actually stronger than I'd realized. Terrifying because many of our best clients had personal relationships with specific employees that Marcus wanted to eliminate. Lisa arrived at 7:30 with pastries from the bakery down the street and more troubling news. "I spent the weekend researching Cascade Holdings," she said, setting down a folder thick with printouts. "It gets more complicated. The company is owned by another shell corporation, which is owned by a third company, which finally traces back to an investment group called Pacific Northwest Ventures." "Never heard of them," Tom said. "That's because they're new. Incorporated just 8 months ago. But get this, one of the principals is Jonathan Marcus Whitfield." I stared at her. "Marcus's middle name is Jonathan, and Whitfield is his mother's maiden name?" Lisa finished. "Your cousin isn't just buying shares through a shell company. He's essentially created his own investment firm to do it." The implications hit me like a punch to the stomach. Marcus hadn't just been planning this for months. He'd been planning it for most of a year. While I'd been focused on day-to-day operations and helping Grandpa during his illness, Marcus had been setting up an elaborate financial structure to take over the company. "There's more," Lisa continued. "Pacific Northwest Ventures has been in contact with 3 of our board members over the past 2 months. They've been positioning themselves as interested outside investors who want to help the company grow." "Which board members?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. "Robert Harrison, Patricia Webb, and Michael Chen." Robert Harrison had been Grandpa's golf partner for 20 years, but he was also a retired investment banker who always thought we should be more aggressive about expansion. Patricia Webb was a marketing executive who joined our board 3 years ago and often questioned our old-fashioned approach to client relations. Michael Chen was Lisa's uncle, which made this betrayal particularly painful. "They don't know that Pacific Northwest Ventures is connected to Marcus?" I asked. "I don't think so. The paperwork is very carefully structured to obscure that connection. To them, it probably looks like legitimate outside investment interest." Tom leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his graying hair. "This is more sophisticated than we thought. Marcus isn't just making an emotional play for control. He's been building a legitimate business case with what appears to be third-party validation." I walked to the window and stared out at the city waking up below. Commuters were hurrying along the sidewalks, umbrellas blooming like dark flowers against the rain. Everyone going about their normal Monday morning routines, unaware that just a few floors above them, a family business was being torn apart by greed and deception. "How much time do we have?" I asked. "Hard to say," Lisa replied. "But if I were in Marcus's position, I'd want to move before the quarterly board meeting next month. That's when we typically review financial performance and strategic planning. So we have maybe 3 weeks, maybe less." I turned back to face them. "Then we need to accelerate our timeline. I want to call an emergency board meeting for this Friday." "That's only 4 days," Tom protested. "We don't have enough time to prepare a comprehensive presentation." "We don't need comprehensive. We need compelling. And we need to get to the board before Marcus realizes we know what he's planning." We spent the rest of the morning outlining our strategy. Instead of trying to match Marcus's detailed business transformation plan, we'd focus on what had always been our strength: relationships. We'd show the board that our approach wasn't outdated. It was actually ahead of the curve. In an increasingly digital world, personal connections and authentic service were becoming more valuable, not less. Lisa would prepare financial projections showing how we could grow revenue by 20% over the next 2 years without layoffs or major operational changes. Tom would document case studies of our most successful client relationships and how they'd grown over time. I would craft the overall narrative, emphasizing continuity with innovation rather than radical transformation. Around noon, my assistant knocked on the conference room door. "Sarah, there's a call for you. Says it's urgent family business." My stomach clenched. "Who is it?" "Marcus Mitchell." Tom and Lisa exchanged glances. We'd been wondering when he'd make his next move. "Transfer it to my office," I said, and closed the door behind me. I took a deep breath before picking up the phone. "Hi, Marcus. How are you?" "Sarah, I'm glad I caught you. Listen, I've been thinking about our conversation Friday night, and I realize I may have gotten ahead of myself. I don't want you to think I'm trying to rush you into anything." His tone was apologetic, almost gentle. It would have been touching if I didn't know it was calculated. "I appreciate that, Marcus. It is a lot to process." "Exactly, which is why I wanted to propose something. What if I put together a small presentation for just you and maybe Tom and Lisa? Nothing formal, just a chance to walk through some ideas and get your feedback before we involve the whole board." "When were you thinking?" "How about Wednesday afternoon? We could meet at my office, Keep it low-key and comfortable. His office. That was interesting. Marcus worked for a boutique consulting firm downtown, the kind of place that specialized in corporate restructuring and efficiency optimization. I'd always wondered how he could afford his expensive lifestyle on a consultant's salary, but now I understood. He'd been using his position to learn about corporate takeover strategies while secretly acquiring shares in our company. "Wednesday works for me," I said. "What time?" "How about 3 o'clock? I'll have my assistant send you the address." After I hung up, I sat in my office thinking about this new development. Marcus was accelerating his timeline, which meant our Friday board meeting might be too late. But it also meant he was feeling pressure, possibly because he'd heard rumors about my investigation. I called Tom and Lisa back into my office and told them about the meeting. "It's obviously a trap," Tom said. "He wants to get us in his territory and spring something on us." "Maybe," I agreed. "But it's also an opportunity. If we can get him to reveal more of his plans, we'll be better prepared for whatever comes next." "Are you sure you want to walk into that?" Lisa asked. "What if he's planning to make you an ultimatum? Then I'll be ready for it." That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before in my professional life. I hired a private investigator. Her name was Janet Rodriguez, a former Seattle police detective who now specialized in corporate investigations. She came highly recommended by our attorney, and her rates were steep, but I figured it was worth the investment. "I need to know everything about my cousin's business activities over the past year," I told her during our meeting in her cramped office near Pike Place Market. "Financial records, business associations, communications with our board members, anything you can find." Janet was a small woman with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked like someone who'd seen everything and wasn't easily impressed. "How quickly do you need this information?" she asked. "By Wednesday morning, if possible." "I know that's not much time." "It's not. But corporate investigations move faster than personal ones because the paper trails are clearer. Most of what your cousin has been doing will be documented somewhere if you know where to look." "What about the shell companies?" Lisa found the connection to Pacific Northwest Ventures, but there might be more. Shell companies leave footprints, bank transfers, incorporation documents, tax filings. It's just a matter of following the money trail. I wrote her a check for the retainer and left feeling slightly more optimistic. At least now I was fighting back instead of just reacting. Tuesday passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. I reviewed every detail of our company's performance, memorized client testimonials, and practiced articulating our vision for growth. Tom and Lisa worked on their respective presentations, and we held several practice sessions to coordinate our message. Tuesday evening, Janet called with a preliminary report. "Your cousin has been busy," she said without preamble. "In addition to Pacific Northwest Ventures, he's connected to 2 other investment entities, Cascade Holdings, which you already knew about, and something called Emerald City Capital." "How much has he invested total?" "Close to $2 million over the past 8 months. That's a lot of money for a 28-year-old consultant." "Where did he get that kind of capital?" "That's where it gets interesting. Most of it came from a private loan from Harrison Investment Group." "Robert Harrison? Our board member?" "The same. Your cousin borrowed against projected future returns from a significant business acquisition opportunity. He never specifically named your company, but the timeline and financial projections match up perfectly." My head was spinning. Robert Harrison had been lending Marcus money to buy shares in our company while serving on our board of directors. It was a massive conflict of interest and probably illegal. "There's more," Janet continued. "I found email communications between Marcus and several employees at your company. He's been asking questions about employee satisfaction, operational inefficiencies, and client concerns." "Which employees?" "I'm still working on that, but I can tell you that at least some of them seem to be providing detailed information about internal operations." After I hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling betrayed on multiple levels. It was bad enough that Marcus was plotting against me, but knowing that some of our own employees were helping him felt like a knife in the back. These were people I'd worked with for years, people I'd considered friends and colleagues. Wednesday morning arrived gray and cold. I dressed carefully in my best suit, navy blue with a white blouse, professional but not intimidating. I wanted to look confident and in control, even though I felt anything but. The meeting was set for 3 o'clock, but I spent the morning with Tom and Lisa doing final preparations. We reviewed every possible scenario we could think of, from simple negotiation to outright ultimatum. "Remember, Tom said as we wrapped up. The goal isn't to win the argument today. It's to gather information and buy time for our board presentation on Friday. And if he makes demands, stall, Lisa advised. Tell him you need time to consider any major proposals. Don't commit to anything. At 2:30, I took the elevator down to the parking garage and drove through downtown Seattle to Marcus's office building. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained overcast, casting everything in shades of gray. I parked in the visitor section and took a few deep breaths before heading inside. Marcus's consulting firm occupied the 20th floor of a gleaming high-rise in the financial district. The lobby was all marble and glass, designed to impress clients with the firm's success and sophistication. A receptionist with a perfect smile directed me to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. Marcus was waiting for me with two other people I didn't recognize, a woman in her 40s with short red hair and a man about Marcus's age in an expensive suit. "Sarah?" Marcus stood up and came around the table to greet me. "Thank you so much for coming. I'd like you to meet my colleagues. This is Patricia Morrison, our senior partner, and David Kim, who specializes in family business transitions." Family business transitions. The phrase sent a chill down my spine. "It's a pleasure to meet you both," I said, shaking hands and trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "We've heard wonderful things about Mitchell and Associates," Patricia said as we sat down. "Your grandfather built quite a legacy." "He did," I agreed, "and we're committed to continuing that legacy." "Of course," David added, "though sometimes continuing a legacy requires adapting to new realities." Here we go, I thought. Marcus opened a leather portfolio and spread several documents across the conference table. "Sarah, I wanted to share some preliminary analysis we've done on the company's position and potential. What we're looking at isn't criticism, it's opportunity." The first document was a competitive analysis showing how our revenue compared to similar firms in the region. We were holding our own, but we weren't the market leader. "As you can see," Marcus continued, "we're performing well in our current niche, but we're leaving significant money on the table by not pursuing larger clients." The second document outlined potential cost savings through operational optimization. In plain English, it was a plan to fire people and reduce services. "Now, I know change is difficult," Patricia interjected, "but the businesses that survive and thrive are the ones that adapt proactively rather than reactively." The third document was the most disturbing, a detailed organizational chart showing the company's new structure under Marcus's leadership. I was listed as senior advisor with no operational authority. "This is quite comprehensive," I said carefully. "How long have you been working on this analysis?" "Several months," David replied. "We believe in thorough preparation for any significant business transition." "And what kind of timeline are you envisioning for this transition?" Marcus leaned forward. "That's really up to you, Sarah. We could phase this in gradually over 6 months, or if you're ready to move quickly, we could implement the core changes within 60 days. What exactly would my role be during this transition?" "Essential," Marcus said earnestly. "You know the clients. You understand the company culture. You have relationships that would be impossible to replace. We need your expertise and your blessing to make this work. But not my leadership." The room fell silent for a moment. Patricia cleared her throat. "Sarah, with all due respect, running a company in today's market requires specific skills and experience. Marcus has been studying business transformation strategies intensively, and he has our firm's full support. Sometimes the best way to honor a founder's legacy is to entrust it to fresh leadership." I looked around the table at their expectant faces. They were all so confident, so certain that their plan was the right path forward. In their minds, they were probably the heroes of this story, rescuing a struggling family business from outdated management. "This is a lot to process," I said finally. "I appreciate the work you've put into this analysis, but I'll need time to review everything carefully." "Of course," Marcus said. "Take all the time you need. But Sarah, I hope you'll consider one important factor. The longer we wait to implement these changes, the more risk we face from external threats. There are larger firms that would love to acquire a company like ours, and they won't be as concerned about preserving jobs or maintaining company culture." It was the same argument he'd made at dinner, but delivered with more authority in this professional setting. The message was clear: accept his leadership or risk losing everything to a hostile takeover. I understand the urgency, I replied, but this is my family's company, and I won't make hasty decisions about its future. David leaned back in his chair. Of course not, but I should mention that we've already had some preliminary conversations with your board members about the company's strategic direction. There's significant interest in exploring new growth opportunities. My blood ran cold. They weren't just presenting me with a plan, they were telling me it was already in motion. Which board members? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. That's not really important right now, Marcus said quickly. What matters is that there's recognition across the organization that change is necessary. I stood up, gathering my composure. I think this meeting has been very informative. Thank you for your time and for putting together such a detailed analysis. I'll review everything and get back to you with my thoughts. Patricia and David exchanged glances. This clearly wasn't going the way they'd expected. Sarah, Marcus said, rising from his chair, I hope you understand that we're trying to work with you here. There are other ways this could play out that might not be as collaborative. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. I met his gaze steadily. I'm sure there are. But right now, I'm still the CEO of Mitchell & Associates, and I'll make decisions in the best interests of the company and its employees. I walked out of that conference room feeling like I'd just been in a boxing match. My hands were shaking as I waited for the elevator, and I could hear muffled conversation from the conference room behind me. They were probably discussing their next move now that the friendly approach had failed. The drive back to my office gave me time to process what had just happened. This wasn't just about Marcus wanting control of the company. It was about a systematic takeover orchestrated by professional consultants who specialized in exactly this kind of business acquisition. They had resources, experience, and apparently some level of board support, but they also had made a crucial mistake. They'd shown their hand too early. I called Tom and Lisa as soon as I got back to the office and asked them to meet me immediately. When I described the meeting, their faces went through the same range of emotions I'd experienced: shock, anger, and determination. They're moving faster than we thought, Tom said. If they've already been talking to board members, our Friday meeting might be too late. Then we move it up, I decided. I want to call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow evening. That's very short notice, Lisa warned. Some members might not be able to attend. Then they'll have to decide what's more important, their other commitments or the future of this company. I spent the rest of Wednesday afternoon calling each board member personally to request their attendance at an emergency meeting. The conversations were revealing. Robert Harrison sounded genuinely surprised by the urgency and asked several probing questions about the agenda. Patricia Webb was immediately available and seemed almost eager to attend. Michael Chen was traveling, but promised to join by video conference. The other 4 board members, all longtime friends of Grandpa's, expressed concern about the sudden meeting, but committed to being there. That evening, Janet Rodriguez called with more intelligence. I've identified the employees who've been communicating with your cousin, she said. There are 3 of them: Jennifer Walsh from accounting, Brad Morrison from client services, and Amanda Foster from operations. Jennifer Walsh had been with the company for 5 years and always seemed professional and competent. Brad Morrison was newer, only 18 months, but had quickly become one of our top account managers. Amanda Foster was a surprise. She'd been Grandpa's personal assistant before transitioning to operations coordination after his death. What kind of information were they providing? Internal financial data, client satisfaction surveys, employee grievance reports, operational inefficiencies. Basically, everything your cousin would need to build a case for management change. Do you think they knew they were helping him plan a takeover? Hard to say. The communications I've found suggest they thought they were just providing input for strategic planning purposes. Your cousin was very careful not to reveal his ultimate intentions. What about the board members? Any new information there? Robert Harrison's financial relationship with your cousin goes deeper than just the loan. His investment firm has been advising Pacific Northwest Ventures on the acquisition strategy. Patricia Webb has been in regular contact with Marcus's consulting firm about potential board positions at other companies they're restructuring. Michael Chen seems to be the most conflicted. He's been asking a lot of questions about the ethics of the situation. I thanked Janet and hung up, feeling overwhelmed by the scope of the conspiracy against me. It wasn't just Marcus. It was a network of people who all stood to benefit from removing me from leadership. Thursday morning, I arrived at the office to find Amanda Foster waiting by my door. Sarah, "Could I speak with you privately?" she asked. Her face was pale, and she looked like she hadn't slept. We went into my office, and she closed the door behind her. "I need to tell you something, and I hope you'll let me explain before you get angry," she began. "I'm listening. Marcus has been asking me questions about the company for months. At first, it seemed innocent. He said he was trying to understand the business better so he could be more helpful to you after your grandfather's death." I waited for her to continue. "But recently, the questions became more specific. He wanted to know about employee complaints, operational problems, financial concerns. He said he was worried about the company's stability and wanted to identify areas where we could improve." "What did you tell him?" Amanda's eyes filled with tears. "Everything. I told him about the budget concerns Lisa raised last quarter, about Tom's frustrations with our outdated computer systems, about the client complaints we received about response times. I thought I was being helpful." "When did you realize something was wrong?" "Yesterday afternoon. Marcus called and asked me to prepare a detailed report on employee satisfaction and operational inefficiencies. He said he was presenting it to some stakeholders who might be able to help improve things. That's when I started to suspect he wasn't just trying to help." I studied her face, trying to determine if this confession was genuine or just another manipulation. Amanda had been loyal to Grandpa for 8 years, and she'd always seemed trustworthy. But then again, I thought the same thing about Marcus until recently. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I love this company, and I realize I may have helped someone who wants to destroy it. If there's anything I can do to fix this, I want to try." I made a decision that was part strategy, part test of Amanda's sincerity. "There is something you can do. I need you to contact Marcus and tell him you've prepared the report he requested. Arrange to meet him this afternoon to deliver it. But instead of the real report, I want you to give him something we prepare together." "What kind of something?" "Information that will help us understand his timeline and his next moves." We spent the next 2 hours crafting a fake report that painted a picture of employee dissatisfaction and operational chaos. If Marcus was planning to use employee concerns to justify his takeover, we'd give him exactly what he expected to see, but with carefully planted misinformation that would help us track how he used the intelligence. Amanda's meeting with Marcus was scheduled for 2 o'clock at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill. I positioned myself at a nearby table where I could observe without being seen. Tom and Lisa were on standby in case we needed backup. The meeting lasted about 30 minutes. I watched Marcus review the fake report with obvious satisfaction, nodding as he read through our fabricated employee complaints and operational problems. He asked Amanda several follow-up questions, which she answered according to our script. After Marcus left, Amanda joined me at my table. "He bought it completely," she said. "And Sarah, he told me something else. He's planning to present his takeover proposal to the board tomorrow night at your emergency meeting." "Tomorrow?" "But I called that meeting. He said he'd been planning to request a board meeting anyway, and when you called yours, it saved him the trouble. He's going to use your meeting as the platform for his presentation." I stared out the coffee shop window at the busy street, watching people hurry past in the late afternoon light. Marcus had outmaneuvered me again. I'd thought I was being proactive by calling the board meeting, but I'd actually given him the perfect opportunity to spring his trap. "There's something else," Amanda continued. "He asked me to attend the board meeting tomorrow to present the employee satisfaction report in person." "What did you tell him?" "That I'd be happy to help." "But Sarah, what if he asks me questions I can't answer? What if he realizes the report is fake?" "Then we'll deal with it. But for now, we have less than 24 hours to prepare our own presentation and hope it's compelling enough to counter whatever Marcus has planned." That evening, Tom, Lisa, and I worked until nearly midnight, refining our strategy and preparing materials. We knew we were walking into an ambush, but we were determined to fight back with everything we had. As I finally drove home through the empty Seattle streets, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. A month ago, I thought my biggest challenge was growing the company and honoring Grandpa's legacy. Now I was fighting for survival against my own family member, supported by professional consultants and aided by people I trusted. Tomorrow night would determine whether Mitchell and Associates remained the company Grandpa built or became something entirely different. Either way, nothing would ever be the same. Friday evening arrived with a spectacular Seattle sunset, the kind that transforms the city into gold and makes you believe anything is possible. I stood in the conference room on the top floor of our building, watching the last light fade over Elliott Bay, and tried to calm my racing heart. In 30 minutes, the board would arrive for what might be the most important meeting in the company's 58-year history. Tom and Lisa were making final preparations, arranging presentation materials, and testing the video conference equipment for Michael Chen's remote participation. Amanda was reviewing her notes one last time, still nervous about her role in our counter strategy. "You don't have to do this," I told her as she shuffled through her papers. "If you're not comfortable confronting Marcus directly, we can find another way." "No," she said firmly. "I created this mess by trusting him. I need to help fix it." The first board member to arrive was Dorothy Martinez, Grandpa's oldest friend and one of the original investors in the company. At 73, she was sharp as ever and had never been impressed by smooth talkers or fancy presentations. "Sarah, dear," she said, giving me a warm hug. "What's this emergency about?" "Your message sounded quite serious." "It is serious, Dorothy. We'll explain everything once everyone arrives." Robert Harrison came next, looking every inch the successful investment banker in his tailored suit and gold watch. He greeted me with professional courtesy, but I could see calculation in his eyes. He knew more about tonight's agenda than he was letting on. Patricia Webb arrived with Marcus, which wasn't a surprise, but still felt like a betrayal. They were deep in conversation as they entered the conference room, and I caught fragments about strategic positioning and market opportunities. The remaining board members trickled in over the next few minutes. James Fletcher, who'd been our attorney for 20 years, Dr. Susan Kim, a marketing professor at the University of Washington, and Thomas Wright, who owned a successful chain of restaurants and understood the challenges of maintaining company culture during growth. Michael Chen joined us via video conference from his hotel room in Chicago, apologizing for not being there in person, but promising his full attention. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," I began once everyone was seated. "I know this is unusual, but we're facing a situation that requires immediate board attention and decision-making." I looked around the table, making eye contact with each member. These people held the future of the company in their hands, and in the next hour, they would have to choose between two completely different visions of what that future should look like. "Before we begin," Marcus said, standing up, "I want to thank Sarah for calling this meeting. As it happens, I've been preparing a presentation on the company's strategic direction that I believe will address many of the concerns that prompted tonight's gathering." He moved to the head of the table with the confidence of someone who believed he'd already won. Patricia Webb smiled encouragingly, and Robert Harrison nodded approvingly. I felt my stomach clench, but I forced myself to remain calm. "However," I said, "since I called this meeting, I'd like to present our perspective first. Then we can discuss any additional proposals." Marcus's smile tightened slightly. "Of course, ladies first." The condescension in his tone was subtle, but unmistakable. I saw Dorothy Martinez's eyebrows rise, and Dr. Kim frowned. Good. At least some of the board was paying attention to more than just words. I activated the projector and began our presentation. For the next 20 minutes, I walked through our analysis of the company's position, our client relationships, our employee satisfaction levels, and our growth projections. Lisa presented financial data showing steady revenue increases and healthy profit margins. Tom discussed operational improvements we could implement without massive restructuring. The core of our message was simple. Mitchell and Associates was already successful, and we could build on that success without abandoning the values and relationships that made us who we were. Our research shows that in today's digital marketplace, authentic relationships and personalized service are actually becoming more valuable, not less, I concluded. Companies that maintain strong cultures and loyal employees consistently outperform those that prioritize short-term efficiency over long-term sustainability. When I finished, there was a moment of thoughtful silence. James Fletcher was taking notes, and Dr. Kim was nodding thoughtfully. Thomas Wright looked impressed by our financial projections. Then Marcus stood up. "Thank you, Sarah. That was a very thorough presentation of the status quo. Now, let me share a different perspective, one that focuses on the opportunities we're currently missing and the threats we're not adequately addressing." His presentation was polished and professional, clearly the work of experienced consultants. He outlined market trends showing consolidation in the marketing industry, competitive pressures from larger firms, and the challenges facing mid-sized companies that didn't adapt quickly enough. "The question we have to ask ourselves," Marcus said, clicking to a slide showing revenue projections, is whether maintaining the current approach is really in the best interests of our shareholders, our employees, and our clients. His growth projections were impressive. 40% revenue increase within 2 years, expansion into new markets, acquisition of major corporate clients. But I noticed he glossed over the human costs, the layoffs, the culture change, the risk of losing our existing client base. Now, I want to be clear, Marcus continued. This isn't about replacing Sarah or dismissing the valuable work she's done. It's about positioning the company for the challenges and opportunities of the next decade. He clicked to an organizational chart showing himself as CEO and me as Chief Client Relations Officer, a title that sounded important but had no real authority. Sarah would continue to play a vital role in client relationships and company culture, while I focus on strategic growth and operational efficiency. It's a partnership that combines continuity with innovation. When he finished, Patricia Webb was the first to speak. Marcus, this is exactly the kind of forward-thinking leadership the company needs. The market analysis is compelling and the growth projections are impressive. Robert Harrison nodded. I agree. While I have tremendous respect for Henry's legacy and Sarah's contributions, we have a fiduciary responsibility to pursue the most profitable path forward. I felt the momentum shifting and knew I had to act quickly. Before we continue, I said, I think the board should be aware of some information that's relevant to this discussion. I nodded to Amanda, who stood up with visible nervousness. Amanda has been researching employee satisfaction and operational concerns, I continued, and her findings might surprise you. Amanda cleared her throat. Actually, I need to confess something to the board. For the past several months, I've been providing information about the company to Marcus Mitchell at his request. The room went dead silent. Marcus's face went pale, and Patricia Webb looked confused. At first, I thought I was helping with legitimate strategic planning, Amanda continued. But yesterday, I realized that the information was being used to build a case for management change without Sarah's knowledge or consent. That's not accurate, Marcus stammered. I was simply trying to understand the company's challenges so I could be helpful. Then perhaps you can explain this, I said, activating the projector again. The screen filled with copies of incorporation documents for Pacific Northwest Ventures, Cascade Holdings, and Emerald City Capital, all clearly connected to Marcus through financial records and personal information. Ladies and gentlemen, my cousin has been secretly acquiring shares in this company for 8 months, using shell corporations and money borrowed from one of our own board members. I looked directly at Robert Harrison, whose face had turned red. Robert, did you disclose to the board that you've loaned Marcus nearly $2 million to buy shares in Mitchell & Associates? That's a private business arrangement, Harrison said defensively. Not when it involves a board member financing a takeover of the company he's supposed to be governing, James Fletcher interjected sharply. That's a massive conflict of interest. The room erupted in cross conversations. Dorothy Martinez was asking pointed questions about the shell companies. Dr. Kim was demanding to know why the board hadn't been informed about share transfers. Thomas Wright was staring at Marcus with obvious disappointment. This is all a misunderstanding, Marcus said, trying to regain control. Yes, I've been acquiring shares, but that demonstrates my commitment to the company's success. And yes, I've been researching our operations, but that's due diligence any responsible investor would conduct. Responsible investors don't use shell companies to hide their identity, Michael Chen said from the video screen. And they don't secretly recruit board members to finance their acquisitions. Furthermore, I continued, the employee satisfaction report that Marcus planned to present tonight as evidence of operational problems. Amanda, would you like to explain that? Amanda took a deep breath. Yesterday, Marcus asked me to prepare a report showing employee dissatisfaction and operational inefficiencies. But the report I gave him was fake, created by Sarah and me to test his intentions. The real employee satisfaction surveys show that 91% of our staff are happy with their jobs and would be opposed to major restructuring. Marcus was visibly struggling now, his composed facade cracking under the weight of these revelations. Even if some of these accusations are true, Patricia Webb said, that doesn't invalidate the business case for change. The market analysis and growth projections are still valid. Are they? I asked. Let me share one more piece of information. I clicked to a new slide showing Marcus's employment history and financial records. My cousin's expertise in business transformation comes from 18 months at a consulting firm that specializes in corporate restructuring. His successful track record consists of exactly 0 completed projects. The detailed market analysis he presented was prepared by his firm's senior partners, not by Marcus himself. Moreover, Tom added, the competitive data in his presentation is outdated. 3 of the companies he cited as successful examples of transformation have either gone out of business or been acquired by larger firms within the past year. The mood in the room had shifted completely. What had started as a professional disagreement between 2 visions for the company had become an exposure of deception and manipulation. Dorothy Martinez leaned forward. Marcus, I've known you since you were a child, and I'm deeply disappointed in your behavior. But more than that, I'm concerned about your judgment. Even if your intentions were good, the methods you've used show a fundamental lack of integrity. I was trying to save the company, Marcus said desperately. Sarah is a good person, but she doesn't have the experience to compete in today's market. I was trying to protect everyone's investments. By lying to us? Dr. Kim asked. By manipulating our employees? By creating a network of shell companies to secretly acquire control? And by borrowing money from a board member who failed to disclose his conflict of interest? James Fletcher added, glaring at Robert Harrison. The vote, when it came, was swift and decisive. By a margin of 6-1, with only Patricia Webb supporting Marcus's proposal, the board rejected his takeover plan and reaffirmed their confidence in my leadership. Robert Harrison was asked to resign from the board immediately, and James Fletcher indicated that there might be legal consequences for his undisclosed conflicts of interest. As the board members filed out, Marcus approached me one last time. Sarah, I hope you understand that I really was trying to help. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. He was young, ambitious, and probably genuinely believed his own story about saving the company. But he was also selfish, manipulative, and willing to destroy relationships for personal gain. Marcus, I think you convinced yourself that your motives were pure, but that doesn't make what you did right. You betrayed my trust, manipulated our employees, and tried to steal something that didn't belong to you. It could have belonged to me, he said quietly. Uncle Henry should have left me the company. I'm family too. And there it was, the real motivation behind everything. Not concern for the company's future or worry about market competition, but wounded pride and entitlement. Marcus had never gotten over being passed over for leadership, and he'd spent months plotting to take by force what he felt should have been given to him freely. Being family isn't enough, I replied. Leadership isn't inherited, it's earned. And the way you've handled this situation proves that Grandpa made the right choice. Marcus left without another word, and Patricia Webb followed him out, clearly uncomfortable with how the evening had unfolded. The next morning, I called an all-hands meeting to address the situation with complete transparency. I explained what had happened, assured everyone that their jobs were secure, and outlined our plans for continued growth. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with several employees expressing relief that they wouldn't have to worry about layoffs or major changes. Amanda approached me after the meeting. Sarah, I want to apologize again for my role in this. If you need to fire me, I understand. Amanda, you made a mistake, but you also made it right. That takes courage, and it's exactly the kind of integrity we value here. I hope you'll stay and help us build something even better. 3 months later, Mitchell & Associates had its best quarter in company history. We landed 2 major new clients who specifically chose us because of our reputation for personal service and employee loyalty. We implemented several operational improvements that increased efficiency without reducing jobs, and employee satisfaction reached an all-time high. Marcus disappeared from Seattle shortly after the board meeting. I heard through family connections that he'd moved to Los Angeles and was working for another consulting firm. I hoped he'd learned something from the experience, but I suspected he was probably just looking for his next opportunity to prove himself at someone else's expense. Robert Harrison faced an ethics investigation by the State Bar Association and quietly resigned from his other board positions. Patricia Webb accepted a position with a large advertising conglomerate, where her focus on efficiency over relationships would probably be more appreciated. As for me, I kept Grandpa's letter in my desk drawer as a reminder of the importance of vigilance, integrity, and staying true to your values, even when it's difficult. Every time I read it, I was grateful for his wisdom and his warning. The company he built survived because he understood that success isn't just about profits or market share. It's about the relationships you build, the trust you earn, and the legacy you leave behind. And that's a lesson worth fighting to protect.